On that day, dark clouds covered the sky, deepening the sorrowful atmosphere. Mrs. Rang sat beside Mr. Rang's coffin, crying until she lost her voice. After the food offering ceremony for Mr. Rang, most guests had left. Only Mrs. Rang, sons Bin and Sin, and their 2 wives remained beside the coffin to keep him company. Little Khan, son of Bin, kept staring at his grandfather's photo on the altar without blinking. Round midnight, a strong wind howled outside. The banana trees rustled in the garden. The wind slammed the windows near Mr. Rang's resting place, producing eerie creaking sounds that pierced the quietness and chilled everyone to the bone. Suddenly, the coffin began to shake violently, swaying as if it might fall off its wooden stands. Bien and Sin stood dumbfounded. Mrs. Rang shouted, "Your father? He's not dead yet. Open the coffin, quick!" Bin rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a hammer and a thick knife, and began prying out the nails. Each popping sound of the nails sent shivers through those present. Sin helped him lift the lid of the coffin. Mr. Rang lay still inside, showing no signs of life. All was silent. Until suddenly, Mr. Rang's arm shot up and pointed directly at Bin's face. Then it dropped back down, motionless. Everyone stood, speechless. Mrs. Rang burst into tears. But Mr. Rang didn't come back to life, and no more strange incidents occurred. After Mr. Rang was buried, Bin couldn't stop thinking about the pointing gesture. What did it mean? Was his father trying to tell him something? He ran through countless scenarios but found no satisfying answer. He became increasingly depressed and emaciated, his skin pale. Sometimes he dreamt of Mr. Rang, looking thinner each time, but never could he see his face. On the 49th day after Mr. Rang's death, while everyone was conducting the memorial ceremony, Bin suddenly suffered a seizure, just like Mr. Rang before his death. Everyone rushed to help him. His wife wailed, but Bin continued convulsing until he stopped breathing. Shocked, they laid him on the bed. His son Khan rushed in, crying over his father. Suddenly, Bin's arm rose and pointed straight at Koch's face, then dropped. His wife screamed, "Why are you taking our son with you? Leave him with me." Everyone began to understand. Mr. Rang had somehow foretold Bin's death. Panic filled the room, but Kana stared silently at his father's face, unblinking. Mrs. Rang collapsed beside her suddenly deceased son. As she regained consciousness, she clutched Kana and shouted, "Quick, take him far away from this house. If he stays, his father will take him too." She commanded Bin's wife, "Take him to your mother's house. Don't let him come back here." Bin's wife picked Connie up and fled, sobbing. Meanwhile, others gathered around Bin's lifeless body. His limbs were stiff, and white foam foamed at his mouth. It was as though he had been poisoned. Neighbors whispered and speculated. Some believed it was poisoning. Others thought it was a hereditary illness, as both father and son had died mysteriously. Rumors spread quickly throughout the small village. Even the commune authorities filed a report to higher-ups about the unusual death. Forensics from the district and province were brought in, but no clear cause of death could be determined. Everyone was terrified. During Bin's funeral, few villagers dared to attend. Most feared misfortune. Only a few close neighbors came to help in Mrs. Rang's moment of grief and confusion. Meanwhile, Khan insisted on attending his father's funeral, but his grandmother refused. He kept trying to run back, forcing her to lock him in the rice storage room to stop him. Sind was also deeply worried. Since Khanhan couldn't return, Sind had to stand in for him at the funeral, but his mind was filled with anxious thoughts. That night, after the neighbors had left and the family was preparing to offer a meal to Bin, a sudden storm struck. Dust and debris flew through the air. Doors slammed loudly against the walls. The tarp covering the funeral tent was blown away, leaving only the bare metal frame. Rain poured down in torrents. The wind intensified so much that the electricity had to be cut off for safety. Mrs. Rang's house was plunged into total darkness. The candles atop B's coffin were extinguished. Only the oil lamp on the altar remained lit, illuminating Mr. Ran's photograph. Thunder rumbled, and lightning split the sky with blinding flashes. Sin had to ask the neighbors for help moving Bin's coffin inside, as the rain was blowing in heavily. As they bent down to lift the coffin, a thunderous crack boomed. A lightning bolt struck the coffin directly, throwing the lid across the room and setting the coffin ablaze. Ben's face was visible as the flames engulfed the coffin. Everyone stood in frozen horror. Mrs. Rang wailed, "Oh, dear husband, you took him, but why didn't you let him stay intact to follow you?" A gust of wind and rain suddenly swept through and extinguished the fire. Smoke began to rise from the smoldering coffin. Sin and others quickly moved Ben's body to the bed, intending to purchase a new coffin the next day. The next morning, Ben was buried. Mourners walked close together, frightened. No one in the village had ever witnessed such a chilling, mysterious death. People whispered. Some said Ben must have sinned in a past life and couldn't find peace. Others believed he had failed in his filial duties and his father had punished him. But only Sin had an inkling of the truth. He knew it started with the shrine they had destroyed and with the cobra that Ben had killed. Throughout the funeral, Ben's wife fainted repeatedly. Mrs. Rang cried until she had no tears left. But Sin remained silent, filled with dread, not for the funeral, but for himself. He and B had demolished the shrine. After Ben's burial, no one dared visit Mrs. Rang's house. Only Sin and his wife, Mrs. Rang, and Ben's widow remained to set up the altar and light incense for Ben. About a week later, Sin returned to the ruins of the shrine he and Ben had destroyed. He knelt, lit 3 incense sticks and muttered prayers. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind him. He turned in fright, but it was only Mrs. Rang. The sunlight had stretched her shadow, startling him. Mrs. Rang, exhausted, said, "Our family is cursed, my son. Ever since we tore down that shrine, strange things have kept happening. Tomorrow, you and I must invite a master from the province to perform a ritual for your father and Ben." Sin had been thinking the same thing since Mr. Rang first saw the ghostly figure, but before he could act, both Mr. Rang and Ben had died. 2 days later, Mrs. Rang brought back a spiritual master, not just a priest, but a sorcerer. As soon as the sorcerer entered the yard, he declared, "This land is heavy with dark energy. Only the house remains balanced. You can't see it, but I can. This is hard to undo. We must perform a ritual to summon positive energy, seal the spirits, and shift the dragon vein." Sin, recalling the underground stream near the shrine, asked, "Is the dragon vein that fast? Clear flowing underground water?" The sorcerer replied, "Yes. I'm trying to locate it to shift its flow. If we find it, we might restore the balance between yin and yang." Sin rushed to get a hoe and returned to where he once saw the stream. He struck the ground hard, turning up clumps of soil, but found no sign of water. The earth had hardened like bricks, dry and cracked. Just a month ago, clear, strong water had flowed there. Arthur shook his head. "The dragon vein is gone, so is prosperity." He turned to Mrs. Rang and said, "Prepare the offerings. I can only keep this place safe for 1 more month. You must move away, far away. If you stay, death will follow." Mrs. Rang and Sin went pale. "There's no other way?" she asked. "I've lived here since marrying. The ancestors are buried here. Who will tend their graves?" The sorcerer counted on his fingers, looked to the sky and said, "This calamity was created by man. Heaven tried to intervene, but you killed the divine guardian." Sin's face turned ashen. He realized the guardian referred to the snake. For 3 days and 2 nights, the sorcerer sat on a small altar, chanting continuously. At times, Messire thought she saw him levitate. She stared closely in awe. He was indeed powerful. She hoped he could lift the curse. Finally, the sorcerer stepped down and shook his head. "I've done all I can. Now, it's up to heaven." He quietly departed. Mrs. Rang turned to Sin and said, "Let me bear this curse. You and your wife must leave. I'm old. If I leave, I'll die of regret. Who will care for the ancestral land?" Sin said nothing. He quietly walked back into the house and lay down. Everything seemed peaceful as the 49th day for Ben came. Everyone was waiting to see if anything would happen. Khan was still sent to stay with his grandmother, and no one dared let him return home. As they were preparing for the ritual to honor Bin, everyone gathered around to pray for his soul to be at peace. Suddenly, the sound of Khan crying came from somewhere, and he ran into the room where the altar was, crying loudly, "I miss Dad so much." Bin's wife hugged him and pulled him away, not allowing him to go near the altar, crying, "Why did you come back? Who brought you here?" He cried while saying, "Grandma locked me in the room and wouldn't let me come back. Just now, I saw Dad standing at the door saying, 'Give me your hand. I'll bring you home,' and then Dad carried me back here." On hearing Khan's words, everyone was startled, looking around to see if Bin was nearby. Grandma Rang burst into tears. "Bin, are you going to take your child with you? He's still so young. Leave him here for your wife to take care of." Bin's wife cried, "Don't take him on. If you take him, I'll go with him." The atmosphere grew more chaotic as everyone cried loudly, but then a cold gust of wind swept in, freezing everyone. Everyone fell silent, waiting to see if anything would happen next. All eyes fixed on Khan to see if anything strange occurred, but nothing happened. Khan remained peacefully in his mother's arms. After the 49-day ceremony for Bin, everyone felt relieved because nothing strange had occurred. Grandma Rang felt lighter, thinking that everything was over and that perhaps heaven had forgiven their family. Bin's wife also stopped sending Khan to stay with his grandmother, letting him stay home. Day by day, he played with the neighborhood children happily. Time passed peacefully until the 100th day after Rang's death. The family was preparing offerings for him. Sin brought the offering tray and placed it on the altar, then stepped back to pray. While he was praying, Khan walked up to him and clasped his hands together. Suddenly, a loud, distant voice echoed from him, as if not coming from Khan himself, but from somewhere far away. "You have to follow me." Then, Khan looked up and stared directly at Sin. His eyes were bloodshot, and blood dripped from them, running down his nose. Khan collapsed to the ground, convulsing, foaming at the mouth, and his limbs stiffened. Grandma Rain ran to hold him, while Bin's wife cried out, "Don't take my child!" But after placing Khan on the bed, he stopped breathing. Everyone was horrified. The blood from Thang Khan's eyes continued to flow, and the drops of blood formed a trail on the bedspread, spelling the word "death" in red. The neighbors clung to each other in terror, unable to believe the frightening scene that had unfolded in broad daylight. Sin stood there motionless, as if in a trance, staring at Khan. Only when Grandma Rang sobbed, "What's the point of living anymore? Watching my loved ones leave one by one. I'd rather be dead," did Sin snap out of it. He quickly carried Bin's wife to another bed and then rushed outside to tell the neighbors, "Please go to the other houses and let everyone know that we need to prepare for Khan's funeral." The neighbors nodded in agreement and left the house. By late afternoon, the sound of funeral horns and drums echoed through the small village. The mournful sound of the flute made the atmosphere even more eerie. The villagers whispered among themselves, too scared to leave their homes at night. The strong winds made the trees rustle, sending chills down everyone's spine. By the coffin, Bin's wife held onto it tightly, crying uncontrollably. Witnessing the death of her husband and now her child, it was truly unbearable. Anyone who saw this scene couldn't hold back their tears. As night drew closer, the ritual for Khan's soul was being performed. The air was still, only the sound of the wooden drum resounding softly in the quiet night. The surroundings were shrouded in a dense fog, making everything seem hazy and white. While performing the ritual, Saeem suddenly froze. He had just seen someone run past the left side of the house, causing the fog to shift. He looked around carefully, but saw nothing. He was sure he had seen someone run through the mist. Trying to calm himself, Sin thought it was probably just fatigue causing him to hallucinate. He lowered his head to focus on the altar again to continue the ritual, but after a while he raised his eyes and looked at the left side of the house again. This time he froze in terror as he saw bloodshot eyes staring directly at him from within the mist. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but there was nothing there. Chu quickly pulled Bin's wife aside, trying to ease his fear. I wasn't going to ask, but I've noticed I haven't seen Grandma Rang around. Where did she go? Why isn't she here performing the ritual for Khan? Bin's wife, tired, replied. She must be tired, probably resting inside. All right, let her rest then. He lifted his head again and looked at the left side of the house, where the chicken egg tree grew next to the temple. This time, he saw the bloodshot eyes staring directly at him. Terrified, Sin grabbed on Bin's wife's hand and stuttered, "Sister, do you see anything by the chicken egg tree?" Bin's wife glanced far out and said, "What do you mean? What do you think you saw? It's so foggy I can't see anything." Sin continued to tremble. "I've been standing here this whole time. I saw a shadow run past the chicken egg tree, and those bloodshot eyes kept staring at me. I've seen it several times. Could it be that I'm just hallucinating so much? Wait, look. Look there, do you see those bloodshot eyes?" Everyone around looked in the direction of the chicken egg tree but saw nothing. They thought Sin was imagining things, but Sin was insistent. His certainty made Bin's wife uncomfortable. "All right, let's go and see if what you say is true." Sin walked ahead, and Bin's wife followed behind. When they reached the chicken egg tree, the fog was still thick. As Sin got closer to the tree, he suddenly felt something hit his head. He thought someone had hung something on the tree. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew violently, and he looked up, screaming, "On the chicken egg tree, it's Grandma Rang! She hung herself there!" Her eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, her tongue hanging out. But the most horrifying thing was that her eyes were glowing red, and blood was dripping from her face, creating a terrifying sight that made anyone who saw it freeze in fear. Everyone heard Sin scream and rushed over. Grandma Rang's body was hanging from the tree. Several men quickly climbed the tree to untie the rope and lower her down. Bin's wife had been speechless and horrified the whole time. Once Grandma Rang's body was placed on the bed, the lights suddenly went out, leaving only a few candles on Khan's coffin, casting a faint light. In the darkness, the red-streaked eyes of Grandma Rang became even more visible and terrifying. The wind began to howl, causing the trees to rustle, and suddenly, the eerie sound of owls hooting filled the air. They circled above Grandma Rang's house, their calls echoing in the quiet night, intensifying the fear of the horrific deaths that had befallen this family. The owls' cries continued to reverberate through the night, like a grim omen of death, making the atmosphere even heavier and more oppressive. The next morning, 2 coffins were placed side by side inside the house, the air thick with sorrow. 2 deaths at once in the same family, along with the terrifying events that had unfolded, sent the villagers into a panic. Everyone was afraid, yet they still came to attend the funeral, out of respect for the village bonds and their curiosity about the mysterious and horrifying deaths of Grandma Rang's family. By the afternoon, Sin's family began to bury Grandma Rang and Kanin. Sin had hired people to dig 2 graves close to each other, wanting Grandma Rang to be laid to rest beside Kanin so she wouldn't be lonely. During the funeral, heavy rain began to fall, and the funeral procession moved slowly from Grandma Rang's house to the cemetery. As they neared the graves, the villagers gathered around the 2 coffins. They first lowered Kanu's coffin into the grave, placing it neatly at the bottom. Bin's wife cried out loudly, then tried to throw herself into the grave to die alongside her son. The villagers had to pull her back to prevent her from getting too close. Then, Grandma Rang's coffin was also lowered into the grave beside Kanu's, with the 2 coffins lying side by side. Sin stood in front of the 2 coffins, tears streaming down his face. The men digging the graves were about to use their shovels to cover the graves when they suddenly stopped, their mouths hanging open in shock. The villagers saw the 2 coffins slowly being lifted, as if something from beneath was pushing them up. When the coffins reached just below the surface of the grave, they realized it was the water pushing them up. However, it only pushed the coffins close to the surface and then stopped, leaving them hovering there. Everyone present at the funeral was terrified, but they continued watching out of curiosity. Sin stood frozen in front of the 2 coffins, when suddenly the coffins fell. What was strange was that both coffins didn't fall at the same time. Only one end of each coffin fell first. The coffins dropped from a great height, and there was a howling sound as if coming from deep within the earth. The two coffins stood upright, and despite being tightly sealed with nails, the lids of the coffins suddenly popped open, revealing Grandma Rang and Khan as if they were standing still inside the coffins. Sin turned pale, and the villagers were terrified. Many women screamed in fear. Before Sin could figure out what to do, suddenly Grandma Rang and Khan Hunt opened their eyes. Their eyes were red with streaks, and blood continued to flow down their pale faces. Both Grandma Rang and Khan pointed their hands at Sin's face. Then their eyes closed, but blood continued to pour out. Sin was horrified, frozen in fear. The villagers scattered, most of them running away, leaving only a few standing to see what would happen next. Meanwhile, the two coffins slowly sank deep into the earth, disappearing into the ground as water, sand, and stones filled the graves, closing them up completely. Sin stood still, motionless, until his wife hugged him and said, "We need to leave this land. If we stay here, you will die too." The people who had witnessed the event gathered around Sin, urging him to leave, saying, "Yes, you should leave. Staying here will only bring misfortune." Sin broke down in tears and cried out to the sky, "This curse is of my making. Why didn't heaven strike me down? Why must I witness this?" Just then, there was a loud thunderclap that seemed to tear the sky apart, striking the bushes in the cemetery and setting them ablaze right before Sin's eyes. The people around him covered their heads in fear. His wife continued to sob, "Let's go home. It's raining heavily." Sin walked away in a daze, his weary figure slowly fading into the distance, away from the cemetery.